Big Dave Martell back with another episode of Culture Dads, an age of sword and cassette. Without further ado, I have another Culture Dad on here. My buddy, Mr. Dan from the Fyrgen, from Winterfylleth, from Wolcensmen, just awesome guy. I can't wait to get started here. Mr. Dan, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm great, Dave. Yeah, so always great to speak to you. And I'm so impressed by how well you introduce your podcast. I'd forget half of that stuff.
It's a lot of years of memorization. It becomes like a what's that, muscle memory, right? Like when you're playing guitar and singing. It's just I have plugs memorized from like 2010 and stuff like that. I could just draw them up. We're not going to do that though. So let's get started. Awesome. Mr. Dan. I want to talk about metal. I want to talk about art. I want to talk about all kind of stuff. And for folks that aren't familiar with Mr. Dan currently, he runs a podcast called The Fyrgen. He talks a lot about stuff like goings on in the world, philosophical, spiritual ideas. Mr. Dan is a heathen like I am. And he also has a really, really brilliant music project called Wolcensmen. It's a folk, neofolk, I guess you could say, acoustic project that has a lot of different instruments and stuff in there. And Wolcensmen is really, really good stuff. And Dan, I'm going to tell you, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but Wolcensmen for me is like a different kind of music. When I listen to music and I'm just jamming, I listen to my 80s metal. I'll pop on some Frankie Valli or Dean Martin, or I'll just put on just like whatever to jam to. I don't put on Wolcensmen for that. Wolcensmen is something that I put on when I'm in my creative space, when I'm brainstorming. It's like the potent high power stuff that I put on. And there's been quite a few times, and I've told you about this in the past, that I've been listening to your music and I'm working on something. I'm on a snag, and then there's the one that's most prevalent in my mind is I think it's from your album, The White Stone or whatever. There's like one song where it shifts kind of this sort of not abruptly, but very suddenly into this like black metal-y kind of atmospheric sort of bar chord sort of sound. And when that popped on, the snag that I was frustrated, is like the idea just popped into my head. So you like, this might sound, kind of unique to some, but your music has a lot of energy and I would say magic, a lot of spiritual energy into that.
Well, and I mean, I definitely don't take that as an insult in any way. And it's always great to hear how different people feel differently about my music. And you know what? I'd agree. I mean, I don't really listen to neofolk very, very much myself. I mean, most of the time I'm putting on 80s metal or black metal or like ambient music, stuff like that. So the kind of music that I have made with Wolcensmen is not the kind of stuff that I tend to listen to very often myself. And that's partly because I actually don't like that many of the bands out there that do make that kind of music. And part of the reason for that I started the Wolcensmen project was because I felt like I wanted to do it in just the right way, in just the way that I felt it should be done. So, I definitely don't take an insult to that at all. And it's a few people have told me that they found it kind of inspirational. I mean, that's completely mind blowing to me to hear people say that, because for me it was very, when I write those songs, they're done in a very kind of methodical way. There's almost nothing kind of spontaneous or kind of instinctual about it. They're done in an almost mathematical way. I guess maybe the initial ideas that come up come from somewhere a bit more magical, but when I'm actually structuring the songs and planning out what instrument's going to play what and doing the recording and everything, I'm quite kind of calculated about it. So it's great to hear that, man.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the 80s metal stuff, and I want to touch on this before we get into I have some theories I want to throw at you, and I want to hear what you have to say about them. But
okay,
I'm a huge 80s metal guy. And I know me and you, we've chat back and forth about this kind of stuff. Some of the obscure bands from the 80s. Your like an Ashbury, Manila Road, these kinds of bands. Was that like the first kind of metal that you got into?
No, not at all. Actually, Manila Road is a band that I only really kind of fell in love with probably about 5 years ago. And so I was pretty late to the Manila Road game. I mean, my first brushes with metal. I mean, it depends what you kind of class as metal, really. I mean, I got into it through the really commercial stuff like Bon Jovi and that, but and then obviously I came to stuff like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and stuff like that, Saxon. And then, just kind of got deeper from there and got into some of the more obscure stuff. And these days, when I put that kind of stuff on, I go to like Fifth Angel and stuff like that. I don't know if
I love Fifth Angel. The Warning.
Yeah. And like, I mean, there are guys out there who are really kind of, I mean, I know that you know a lot about this stuff, and we could probably name all kinds of bands, but I'm not like a deep mega nerd on kind of 80s metal, but I know what I like, and some of it's not really obvious stuff, but some of it is.
So, and speaking of metal, before you started Wolcensmen, you were in a band called Winterfylleth, and a lot of people that are black metal fans, like hardcore, into the more authentic black metal, I guess you could say, would have heard of this, because you guys played some pretty big venues, you toured with some pretty big bands. Can you tell us about like your experience in the industry?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I joined Winterfylleth at the beginning. I think it was the beginning of 2015, if I remember rightly. Was it 2015? Yeah, 2015. And I kind of hit the ground running with it. My first, a couple of months, well, I think a month after joining, I was doing a tour around the UK with a band called, we were supporting a band called Primordial from Ireland. They were pretty big. And then like a couple of months later, Winterfylleth won an award at the Metal Hammer Awards in London, which was like the best underground band. So that was kind of weird, because I was going up on stage at this award ceremony to receive an award for activity which I hadn't actually been responsible for. So that was kind of odd, but I mean, we had a lot of good experiences. I mean, Winterfylleth was never like a full-time tour. Well, it isn't a full-time touring band. Obviously they're still going without me now, and they're still good friends of mine. But we'd do a couple of short European tours a year and play a few festivals. And I had some great experiences. I mean, I don't know what kind of specifically you're interested in with regards to the music industry, because I've kind of seen that from many different sides. I've worked as a graphic designer in the music industry for a long time. I've been a musician as well. I even ran a very small label years ago. I've run a merch company in recent months, so I kind of seen the music industry from lots of different angles, and it's a strange place.
Why do you say it's a strange place?
Because it's not how it should be, and it's not how it used to be. I mean, in my latest Fyrgen podcast, one of the questions I was asked was, how do I feel about my musical career? And I mentioned in there that I'm pretty kind of happy that I've achieved everything that I wanted to achieve and way more. And even though, I kind of, like a lot of people, I grew up, dreaming of one day playing to like 50,000 people in a stadium or something.
Yeah.
I'm completely happy with the fact that that's never going to happen, because that's not the way that the music industry works anymore. It's only the extremely lucky and most hardworking bands ever get anywhere near that now, with record sales as they are. So I think these days the music industry is a place where you need to find contentment in just the raw creation of music, and also bands these days are expected to kind of be social media pioneers and video editors and like, you know, presenters and like everything rolled into one rather than just musicians who kind of look good, you know. So it's the whole landscape has really changed in a drastic way in the last 10-20 years, you know.
Yeah. One thing, I made a post about this a while back, talking about the homogenization of the radio back in the 90s. And one thing that I noticed, I'm 35, I'm a little bit younger than you, but I've always been very into the music scene, paid attention. I grew up in an area that not too far away, there was a pretty big metal scene. So I noticed that there was a pretty drastic transformation, probably from the 90s going into the 2000s. And a lot of the local scenes, there are still some local scenes, but they've dried up quite a bit. And I would attribute this to the lack of localization from radio stations. I remember, and I'm sure you remember this too, I'm not sure if England had a similar situation, but here in the States, our local radio stations were very into the local music scenes. The DJs would go to the shows. They knew the local bands. They would do giveaways and like sweepstakes, giving away T-shirts or albums or like whatever. Right? It was like intertwined with our local music scenes. When the radio stations got homogenized, and this was there was actually a law that was passed in the 1934 Communications Act, which was like it was an antitrust law against monopolization of radio stations. This got changed, but in like 1995 or something like that, a bunch of big media conglomerates came together, obviously backed by the usual suspects, the hedge funds of the world. They lobbied to get this overturned and effectively homogenized, took complete control over all the radio stations. And when this happened, you stopped hearing local bands on the radio. And this sort of robbed local musicians and small-time bands of means to make a living. And then when the incentivization went away, it like really, really dried up. And the only people that were left were kind of like, you know, guys that really, really loved it, and had day jobs and stuff like that. Did you guys experience something like that over in the UK?
No, I don't think it's ever been as good as that. Well, it hasn't been as good as that for a long time here. You know, I mean, my dad was in a band when he was younger in like the, well, I guess that would have been probably the very early 70s. He was in a band called Nova, which were just, you know, I mean, they never went anywhere, but they were just like a local little kind of rock group. You know, they worshipped bands like Free and stuff like that. But, you know, he'd tell me how he'd get on, like, they'd get songs on the local radio quite regularly and they do little live performances. But by the time I was playing in bands in the like late 90s, that just wasn't a feature of radio over here. And we don't have what is it you call it over there? It's like a local access or something radio, or where where people have it's quite easy for people to get a radio show over in the States, or it was anyway. I don't know if it's still the same. No. But we've never had anything like that here. I mean, we had in like the 80s and 90s, we had guys like John Peel, who he was a radio presenter on Radio 1, BBC Radio 1. So that's a big station. I think it was Radio 1 anyway. It was one of the BBC stations anyway. So a big station. And he would go out of his way to discover new obscure bands and feature them on his show. And, you know, he focused on kind of underground and weird subcultures like dark wave and like punk and new wave and new romantic stuff and that. But we don't really have anything like that anymore. I mean, there's a guy on Radio 1, I forget his name now, who does something kind of similar, but I don't think he has anywhere near as much freedom to kind of, you know, pluck obscure bands out of the ether and bring them to kind of superstardom or anything like that. So yeah, it's I think it sounds to me like that's been one of the cool things in America over the last few decades, is this like wide range of like local access radio and stuff that you have over there, which gives these kind of local bands a shot. But we really don't have that here. And I mean, rock music and particularly metal has just been so kind of verboten here for so long now that even the smaller stations just wouldn't touch that kind of music with a barge pole.
Yeah, I mean, we had that as well. It was only really certain area. Like we had one station where I was at that would actually play at it was at nighttime, right? It had to be at nighttime, would play the local thrash bands, because that's kind of, you know, the style of metal that was popping in my region. It was thrash metal, and then we had some death metal scenes, and that was kind of our flavor. There's one thing I wanted to bring by you. I did like a talk about this, and I've noticed this not just in literature but in music as well. The Bizarre Archives, my publication, is sort of 50-50 Brits and Americans, right? We all kind of work together. We're all buddies and stuff like that. So I get submissions from mostly 50-50 Englishmen and Americans. And one thing that I've noticed is that there is a pretty big difference, not all the time. And, you know, there's mixtures. Not everybody's the same. But for the most part, there is a trend among the two groups, broadly speaking, in their approach to literature. And that is, and, you know, when I was doing this, somebody actually sent me an essay somebody wrote. Some guy, you know, back in the 50s wrote an essay. It was called like the American action versus the British mind puzzle or something like that. And I've noticed that in literature, there is this little bit of a different instinct to what how to structure a story. The English guys, they very much do that. They like to write mind. But now, obviously, there is a difference. English folks have a better education. So when I get submissions from British people, I know right away just from the spellings, and because it's usually formatted better. You know, unfortunately in America, a lot of guys drop out of school. Our school system just blows. So there's a lot of more problems with spelling and stuff like that. However, I noticed from the American side of things, there is this Americans instinctively have this talent of writing very good action scenes and things that are much more experiential and emotional, as opposed to things that are more thought out. Like I mentioned, this essayist called it the mind puzzle. And this is something that I've noticed in music as well. Growing up, we had heart pounding thrash, like in your face thrash and death metal. And when I hear a lot of the kind of the English version of this, it's a little bit more melodic. It has a little bit more of an atmosphere, and this goes to even their types of thrash and their types of death metal as well. Is this something that you've noticed?
I mean, I'd never really thought about it before, to be honest with you. But I mean, when I think about 80s American metal versus, you know, 70s and 80s British metal, I think there's like a kind of like a boldness to the American stuff that's perhaps not there in the British stuff in quite the same way. Like, I guess, I don't know. I guess, I mean, if you compare a band like Iron Maiden to a band like, I don't know, like Rat or something like that. And there's definitely like a kind of punchier aspect to a band like Rat. I mean, Iron Maiden were obviously around a bit before Rat, but yeah, I guess it makes sense. I mean, one thing that I would add to that is that you mentioned that, you know, the British guys, their formatting and spelling is maybe often better than the Americans. But I bet if you were to like commission some stuff from like a Dutch writer in English or like a Swedish writer in English or something like that, you'd probably find that it's even better than the English one, because, like, man, I mean, our education here is it's not that great. It's honestly, I think that the English language is probably taught better outside of England these days than it is in England, which is kind of a shame. But yeah, I don't know, like, I guess with literature, with music, with film, definitely. I think what you're saying there is most obvious in film. Like when I think about British films that are made these days, they try to be sophisticated, almost invariably. Whereas I'm not saying that Americans can't make sophisticated films. I'm just saying that probably a higher percentage of American films are that more kind of brash, straight to the point kind of style.
Yeah, I would say that this is very evident in comedy, right? If you look at kind of the old school comedies that are coming out of England, you know, your Monty Pythons and, you know, so on and so forth. It's a little bit more, it's a little slapstick and it's kind of absurdist, but it has like you mentioned, it's a little bit more sophisticated. There's a little bit, it's not quite as brash. Whereas if you're looking at American comedies from that time, the National Lampoons, Porky's, Weekend at Bernie's, these are kind of like raunchy, on the nose, you know, kind of stuff. And it's very evident in not just the movies, but in like this stand-up comedy. And I think that there's something to be said for this American-British relationship, but also this American-British, a little bit of a competition of kicking art forms back to each other. Have you ever considered that?
Well, I mean, I suppose it makes sense if we look at the history of the two countries, doesn't it? I mean, America is founded on like the Anglo, you know, folk initially, and I guess the Anglos who went and settled in America would have been the bolder faction of the British Isles, you know, bold enough to set forth across the Atlantic Ocean and, you know, make a new life. And when I think about the American spirit and the American dream, that's what I think about, is that kind of confidence, the confidence to do that, to go and just go and like put yourself out there and not kind of worry too much about the consequences of it. And I do think that for all of America's and Britain's faults in the modern day, I do think that there is a remnant of that kind of bold spirit that still stands and has come through in stuff like music and film.
And I think obviously not all, because, you know, just like everywhere in the world is getting globalized. You have your urbanite weirdos, you know, you got your like normie bugmen everywhere in the world now. It's unavoidable. But one thing that I have found, especially when we're talking about you know, folk music and English art forms, I find that the English are very solidly organic and natural in kind of their folk spirit. There's not really a whole lot that was lost in function, I guess you could say. I'm not sure I'm articulating this well, but like when I listen to your music, when I listen to Wolcensmen, I hear neofolk, but I hear something that is very distinctly English. And something that goes back, it's part of a lineage, it's part of a culture. Whereas I think that there's a lot of other European countries that have a pretty gnarly, broken cultural tradition, and they're kind of grasping at straws and sort of pretending that they're not. You know what I mean? Like I watch some of the Scandinavian performances and stuff like that, and I feel that they kind of plug Sami culture into a lot of what they try to pass off as ancient Norse culture, right? Whereas the English know what being English means.
Yeah, I think some of us do. I definitely don't think that's a widespread mindset among the modern English people. No, I think, it's with Wolcensmen, it's always been very, very important to me to get that across. So I've been very conscious of it since the beginning. And I guess maybe, you know, musical acts from other countries have maybe been a bit more casual about it. They've maybe kind of let the chips fall as they may. Whereas I've been quite controlling and very specific. You know, if I come up with a musical idea that doesn't sound like it comes from England, or at least the northwest of Europe, and it doesn't, exude the right atmosphere and the right feel, then I scrap it immediately. You know, I'm pretty ruthless about the stuff I come up with in that way. And also, you know, I mean, I have to kind of, you know, tip my hat to the bands that came before me. There's a metal band called Forefather who are really kind of the excuse the pun, but they are the forefathers of like heritage metal in England. They're the band. They're the first band. They kind of came out of the black metal scene, and they were the first band that were kind of expressing a boldly, overtly English identity in terms of English Anglo-Saxon history. This was something that the Scandinavian bands were already doing. Some of the black metal bands had this proudly Norwegian sort of national romantic message that they were getting across. But the first English band to really do that was Forefather. When you listen to Forefather's music, you can hear it in the melodies themselves. They sound very, very English. They sound very Anglo, and it's you can kind of hear it in the way that the melodies are almost a bit major, like as opposed to minor. They're somehow a bit more kind of upbeat and sunny in a way, which is ironic given the poor weather that we usually have here. But and I mean, even though with Wolcensmen, I don't think I have quite such a major vibe. There are a few sections, like one of the songs on Fire in the White Stone, one of the later ones, Fellowship, I think it's called, and it's got a very kind of major guitar like run in it. And when I wrote that, I was over the moon that I'd come up with something that sounded so English and so much like Forefather, it sounded like it couldn't come from another country. So yeah, I think what you're saying there is part of this kind of awakening of English identity, which is really only something that's happened over the last kind of 15, 20 years. But before that, I really think that most English people were just as lost as anyone else, really.
So maybe that's just the type of art forms that I'm being exposed to. I'm seeing this. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I know that. So I wanted to run this theory past you. I've been boiling this up in my mind, and I'm making a PowerPoint about it. So I'm gonna actually
okay.
I'm gonna do a full presentation. I want to run it by you because I know that you're a guy that thinks about this kind of stuff. About the nature of the artist and what is art and what these things mean. As an artist, do you feel that you are expressing? Is this like an expression? Is your art an expression of yourself, or would you say that you feel that maybe you have more in common with perhaps a skald or a bard or somebody that is using your talent to force an experience onto somebody?
Do you mean does the music, does the culture come through us, like from kind of like a well of the folk soul, or is it something that we can take full credit for, like as an individual? Is that what you're getting at, or?
No, but I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I definitely think it's the former. I think we are the sum of our ancestors and of our national identity. So I don't think we can ever take full credit for what we as an individual seem to create. We're drawing upon such a large well that comes from before and beneath us. So yeah, that's how I see that. I definitely feel like the music seems to kind of come through me, and I guess you probably feel like that with your writing as well. Like you said, sometimes just a certain bit of music will trigger something, and then all of a sudden, like this kind of stream of consciousness flows through you. And in those moments, I think it's hard to argue that it's not coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere a little bit more ancient, rather than just from you as an individual.
Yeah, I actually wrote a poem a while back I called it Artist Trance. The first few lines were something like, it was like, hoist the pen, garner the ink, your mind ascend and body sink. And this is kind of like, I feel that there's a little bit of a trance when you go into almost like a I don't even know what almost like a frenzy when you're in this creative mode. And I feel that when you're in this is when you become the conduit for the information that comes from the folk soul. Like Tolkien called this the soup pot. I just did a post about it earlier, sort of mentioning it. He described there's this he called it the soup pot, or later they start calling it the cauldron of stories. And he described this soup pot that all ideas already exist in. It's almost like the folk soul. And every time you draw out an idea, you become a conduit for an idea, you dip your ladle into the soup pot and you pull it out, and it kind of has your own little bit of flavor on it, so your own little bit of seasoning. It tastes a little bit different, but it's from the broth. It's from that soup. And I mentioned in the post, I said, it's interesting that this is ritually coterminous with the with Mimir's-Brunner, the three wells of creation, and how the ancient Germanics would have an Aus kettle that they would brew a sacred stew in for their sacred rites. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I saw your post, and I have to agree, it makes good sense. And I'm glad I wasn't aware that Tolkien had referred to it that way, and I'm glad to hear that he did, because it not only is it a great kind of metaphor, but it's also proof that he knew that he was drawing on something deeper, because a lot of people who will criticize our heathen understanding of Tolkien's work will say that, no, he was a Christian, and it was all a metaphor for Christianity, and he knew exactly what he was doing and stuff. Whereas people like myself would say, well, yes and no. Yeah, he was a self-proclaimed Catholic and that, but he was drawing on something that even he probably wasn't entirely aware of. And with this soup pot analogy, I guess he knew that.
So when you're in your creative state, would you say you kind of have I know earlier you mentioned there's kind of like mathematical process, but do you feel that there's kind of like another space that you go to when you're creating something?
Yeah, kind of, but it's kind of like a dual faceted process for me. Like, most of my initial ideas I come up with when I'm actually, funnily enough, when I'm walking my dog in the morning. So unfortunately, she's got kind of old now, and she's actually got really bad back legs. So I'm not currently walking her anymore. Unfortunately, she's nearly 12 years old, and she's that type of breed which suffers from really bad back legs. So I'm actually really missing walking her first thing in the morning, because that's when I used to come up with my musical ideas. I'd go on like a 30 or 40 minute walk, and that would be the time when I would just run these ideas through my head, and whether it be musical or lyrical ideas, that would always be where they would generate during those walks. And then when I've got those initial ideas, then the kind of mathematical part of me comes in, when I'm starting to kind of piece the ideas together in a structured way, and being quite kind of empirical about how many times do I repeat this melody before it changes to this, and am I going to have a key change here, and if so, what key am I going to go to, and stuff like that. And that's where it becomes a bit more mathematical. So I'm not someone who's ever composed music or literature or lyrics or anything in like an altered state of consciousness. I have definitely drawn on some of my experiences that I've had in a kind of altered state of consciousness for like lyrical ideas. But the music itself always comes in a very lucid state, but almost in like a kind of, that semi-meditative state that you get into when you're just like on a walk and you've not got to worry about work or socializing or, anything like that. It's just you and your dog, and you're out, in the fields or in the woods or whatever, and you can just let your mind wander and see what comes forth.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I wanted to here's a theory that I've been kicking around here, and this is part of what this goes into the Tolkien soup pot and like all of this kind of stuff, and it's kind of building off. You mentioned how art kind of comes from the folk soul, right? And I completely agree with this, and I don't think that there are any new ideas. I think that ideas that we draw up and we kind of put into our time, we give our our currentness to it, right? We put our flavor, our seasoning on this. And when people react to it and they really like it, when it really strikes that chord and it stabs into the primordia, the mythopoetic current, and it has the secret sauce to like shake everything up, I don't think that it's a new idea. I think it has this illusion. I call it the illusion of firstness. And when this illusion of firstness, yes, it is an illusion that it's new. It's not actually new, but it's important that it has this illusion of newness. So when we draw into this folk soul, I think one of the problems with art today, and I see this in metal, I see this in literature, I see this in all this kind of stuff, is postmodernity has created this archetype that I call the selfish artist. This idea that we are individuals. The art is a reflection of me. It's exactly how I want to do it. It's not for anybody else. I'm not here to please anybody, which is kind of the opposite of what the true artist archetype was in a folkish sense, which is the skald, which is the bard. You use your talents as a magical form of thrusting an experience upon somebody. You're an entertainer. You're here to like put them into this immersive world, and it's like a ritual of power or something like that. Yeah, and I think so. Go ahead.
No, you finish. I thought you were done.
Oh, so what I'm going to propose is we need to strangle the selfish artist. We need to get rid of that and go back to this idea of being the eternal skald, being the bard, and using our art forms as magic to thrust experiences upon the viewer in this kind of way, because I think that the bad guys understand this, and that's their motivation behind creating art, albeit it is subversive and bad. And then kind of the guys that are underneath that are like aspiring artists still cling on to this selfish artist motivation. What do you think about all that? I'm still kind of digging through.
No, I know what you're getting at, and I'm really glad that you said that, actually, because it's something I feel quite strongly about too. And like the first thing I would say is that, like, let's be honest about this. As artists, we have a social responsibility. We talk about dipping into the folk soul, the pool of like folk creativity, but what rarely gets mentioned is that we have a responsibility to uphold certain cultural norms as well through our art. For example, if you're writing a story and you're of the Arabic cultural tradition, then it might be perfectly normal for an aspect of your story to be that the protagonist has 3 wives. Whereas if you're writing a story in the Germanic, as part of the Germanic folk, then that is not okay at all, and you have a responsibility not to include that in your story. So we do have certain kind of limits which we're bound to work within because of our folk culture. And I think that's something that the selfish artist, as you say, doesn't respect. They don't. These kind of nihilistic, kind of like punk artists from like the 70s onwards, or maybe even the 60s onwards, who had this idea that we should be free to express ourselves in any way that that comes naturally or whatever. But through that, a lot of degenerate ideas have been, promulgated. So yeah, that's the first thing I'd say on that. And the other thing I would say is that I've known a lot of musicians in my time who claim that the only person that they are responsible for pleasing is themselves. That they are going to make music that it doesn't matter if anyone else listens to it or not. All that matters is that it pleases them, this kind of self-indulgent art that people create. And that this is unfortunately quite common in extreme metal, particularly black metal, over the last 20 years. This idea of being so elitist that you don't care what the listener thinks, that you are just going to make something that you care about, and that's all that matters. I've always been dead against that because firstly, because I think we have a responsibility to add to the pool of creativity that our folk has collected, as a whole, and to add something of worth. And secondly, like, if no one else is going to enjoy listening to my music, then is it really that good? I mean, anyone can throw together some like, you know, badly played riffs and call it art and say, oh, I meant it to sound like that because that's how, you know, I expressed it or whatever. But I think a lot of people are kidding themselves that there is actually any merit to that. And how we can know that our art has merit is generally by people, particularly people of our own folk, appreciating it.
Yeah. Actually, when I started to think about this idea here, this kind of hatred for the selfish artist, I went to a local show like years and years ago, and a lot of the local shows that I used to go to, they had, like, you would have a hardcore band, you would have a thrash band, you would have this band and that band, you would have like all these different kinds of bands like put like on the lineup, right? They didn't have the luxury of having like a themed whatever. They would just try to have everybody that's mostly metal here, everybody that's mostly punk on this night, whatever. You know what I mean? So I remember I went to a show and I saw this lineup of bands, and the last two bands were so starkly different. The last band that played was this kind of avant-garde, experimental type of metal. I don't even know, you know what I mean? It was like one of those, like, we're trying to blur genres and we're trying to, do whatever. And they had some like noise stuff in there, and they had this big giant following, right? They had this big following of artsy fartsy kind of people. And at the time they were all on MySpace. They had a big MySpace following, and they were they were like the cutting edge of social media pioneers. Well, they were the headline. The band before them was this sort of I guess they called themselves crossover. They were sort of reminding me of I don't know if you ever heard of a band called Madball. They were like very early. Yeah, East Coast thrash, hardcore kind of mashup. They had a vocalist that was like a stereotypical hardcore vocalist, head shaved, jacked guy. Oh, don't do vocals like this. I mean, like one of them kind of bands. This band, their riffs were nothing more than like power chords. There were no solos. Their drummer didn't do any blast beats. The music was very, very simple. They went up there and they fucking killed it. Like, it was this power energy. The vocalist was getting in the crowd. It was so awesome. And like everybody that went there went to see this avant-garde band. They all had the shirts on. They were sort of like an Opeth knockoff, this band. So they go, they're all wearing these shirts, and everybody, those even their fans during this hardcore band were moshing and just going nuts, right? It was a great show. The headline band comes up, and in comparison, they were a fucking snooze. Even their own fans were like standing in the back and smoking while they were playing, and it was like night and day. These guys that got up on stage with the mentality of, I want to get everybody riled up and have a good time and go nuts, blew out these guys that were trying to create this novelty. And that is just like really kicked this idea off for me that your job as an artist is first and foremost is to be an entertainer and to convey power and experience upon the viewer, and not create this kind of artsy fartsy avant-garde shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, almost nobody listening to this will know this, but I used to operate in that hardcore scene myself in London. I played in a band of that kind of style. That, like, we played with Madball a couple of times, and we toured with like a band from the west coast of America, from Sacramento, called Hoods, That's not the West Coast, is it? Sacramento. So that's the East Coast. Where were they from?
Sacramento's in California. That's West Coast.
Oh, it is. Yeah, West Coast. Sorry, yeah. So yeah, they were from Sacramento. So they were kind of that vibe too. And like, it's kind of a strange era of my life, which I look back on almost like it's someone else. But one thing that I really appreciated about that whole scene, like the punk and the hardcore scenes, was that at every step of the way, when you're in that kind of band, you are thinking entirely about crowd participation. You are thinking about what do I want to see if I go and see a band play? What do I want the band to be doing? How do I want them to sound? How do I want them to like address the audience? What do I want it to be like? And then as a band, you are putting all that stuff into practice. So you are like, you go on stage with full of energy. You're like, you know, bouncing around and stuff. And you know, this stuff kind of seems stupid and goofy to a lot of people, particularly people who are more into sophisticated music. But as you said, you know, sometimes just that real kind of like grog brain stuff could just be fun. And I mean, look no further than like the likes of AC/DC. I mean, you know, probably the biggest rock band of all time, all things considered, how simple their music has always been, how simple the lyrics have always been, you know. And in my opinion, there is actually a genius to that sort of simplicity and that ability to know what appeals to people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? With AC, I'm not a big AC/DC guy because it's so played. You hear it on the radio every single day. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, when I hear those early Bon Scott songs and hits and albums and stuff, you know, Long Way to the Top, if you want to rock and roll, that shit kicked ass. That was great music. That was great music.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, myself as a composer, I actually strive to make my music more simple because to me, like I said, I think that it's actually more difficult to make great simple music than it is to make good complex music. And most of us kind of overthink it. We kind of overbake it. You know, we kind of take it too far and we play with the composition too much rather than just letting it be something simple and powerful. So I personally have a lot of respect for bands like AC/DC who have that like natural ability to just write really good direct music.
Yeah, you know, Mike's he's gonna go nuts when he hears this. He loves cool. He's a big advocate of the idea that constraint makes really good art. You know, I do, and I agree with him with for the most part, right? Because there's you know, I really love brevity. I love brevity. I love, you know, I mean, being a guy that publishes overwhelmingly short form fiction. I love when guys have that talent to tell me a whole story that front to back was just an exciting ride in like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words. You know what I mean? And there's something to be said, but there's also something to be said. You know, Yngwie Malmsteen has a very famous quote. Nils is going to know this about. He says, "What do you mean less is more? More is more," is what he says. And you know, Yngwie Malmsteen would say something like this. And there's got to be a place for guys like the maestro, the great Yngwie Malmsteen. But I think that there is a balance to be had when it comes to art. And I think that a lot of modern artists like forget, they fall back. I think it goes back into the selfish artist. They forget that they're here for the audience. You know what I mean? They forget about the skald and the bard, and it becomes, as you said, self-indulgent.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a room for both kind of sides of that. And yeah, I mean, I admire Yngwie J. Malmsteen, just to avoid confusion with any of the other Yngwie Malmsteens out there. I do admire him for sure, you know, and the complexity of his playing.
Yeah, absolutely. So going on to art forms and everything like that, where would you like to see, what do you think that modern art is missing from maybe art from antiquity, whether it be music or literature or whatever, or maybe even just past decades, that might be, because a lot of people say this. A lot of people say that modern film, and we know who's behind, you know, making the lousy movies. We don't got to get into all that. But as far as like film and music and literature and art forms, a lot of people, you know, say that in their critique that modern stuff is missing something. There's a little bit of magic or secret sauce that's missing from a lot of modern stuff. What would you say is that secret sauce?
That's a good question. I think if I can use an example of black metal, which is a genre that I'm passionate about, I'm actually working on a new black metal project of my own, and because I'm obsessed with 90s Norwegian black metal specifically, that is my primary influence. And what I'm trying to do is correct what I believe to be all of the flaws of pretty much all of the black metal that has come since the 90s, and particularly mainly from that country. And I think if I were to analyze what I think the difference is that bands these days are afraid to add personality to their music. So bands these days, to give an obvious example, bands want their song to flow perfectly from beginning to end. But you listen to some of that 90s stuff, and there are these really, really abrupt, like, tempo changes that come out of nowhere. And to the modern listener, that's pretty jarring. It's like, why the fuck did why did they change tempo at that point in the song so drastically? Like, what, that must be a mistake or something, whereas to me, those instances, they're the things that I look out for. They're the things that I listen to in music. They're the things that kind of make my ears prick up. And when I listen to most black metal that's come out over the last 20 years, I hear almost none of that kind of character. Everything is a lot safer. No one is willing to do something that, that they think a lot of people might deem to be jarring or like incorrect, or like something that has no kind of practical purpose. Why put a tempo change there? Why put like this really strange key change there? Why have this like really obviously tacky keyboard sound at that moment? I think basically what I'm getting at is that I think bands these days are they play it too safe. They're too afraid of kind of coming across as doing something wrong, or something that's too unique, or something that is just there for the sake of being there rather than kind of serving some kind of function. It's kind of a difficult thing to describe, so I hope I'm getting that across. But I think that is something that kind of, and I think that you can extrapolate that over to literature as well. Like when I listen, I recently reread The Hobbit to my daughters, and there are things in Tolkien's writings that no modern fantasy author, or almost no modern fantasy author, would do, like using very kind of kitsch names for some of the characters, like Bilbo, stuff like that. These kind of things, which I think these days would almost be frowned upon, because they're kind of like, that's a really silly name. Like, can't you think of a cooler name than Bilbo? But it's those things which are almost incongruous, which give art their personality and set that particular piece of art apart from other from its peers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually going through, I'm doing layout for quite a few classics from the early 1900s, classic fiction. And let me tell you, reading over these books, these guys wrote in a way that would probably get rejected by 99% of editors in big publishing companies today. They have absolutely monstrous run-on sentences. They seem to like just not even care at all about sentence structure, right? They just commas and breaks and this, and they go on and on and on. They have dialogue, and they have no indicators of who said it. They just kind of, have this back and forth go. There's just like tons of stuff in there that would just like get rejected by modern editors, but they just didn't care, right? They just didn't care. It was like, it went into the flavor of how they wrote. So I would agree. Would you say that this thing that modern people do has to do with the technosphere and over-socialization?
Yeah, I would. And I would also say that it has to do with the fact that most of the kind of gatekeepers of creative art these days, like the record labels, the A&R guys, the publishers, the editors, in my experience and my opinion, most of them wouldn't know great art if it like kicked them up the backside. Like they just, somehow these people have found themselves in a position where they are the arbitrators of what comes through to the consumer, but they actually don't really understand what makes great art themselves. And I think they kind of choke modern artists to the extent where bands and, or poets and authors and directors and whatever like type of art people are creating, they feel this need to make their art safe so that it will pass these gatekeepers, when in actual fact these gatekeepers don't know how to approve good art. I think that's a major problem for me, and I think so. Social media is definitely responsible for it, because as a band now, as a musician, you could put a song up, and instantly you're going to get like criticism from 100 people, whereas 20, 30 years ago, that wasn't the case. You'd put your record out, and then maybe a few months later, you'd see some reviews come in, like in print form in magazines. And yeah, there'd be a couple of bad reviews, but because that criticism wasn't so immediate, I think it was easier to kind of go out on a limb and do something a bit bolder, a bit braver, something that is, was completely, at your own whim. You weren't trying to please anyone else, but at the same time, I don't mean to kind of contradict what we were saying there about the selfish artists, because I think those bands, they knew how to make music that other people enjoyed, but they weren't afraid to like throw a couple of odd bits in the songs here and there, even if most of the riffs or most of the melodies were pretty kind of accessible. And I think it's probably that kind of directness between putting your art out there and the feedback that you get. It happens almost instantly now, and as a musician, you're kind of forced to pay very, very close attention to your social media. So you pick up on that feedback instantly. So most musicians play it very, very safe. They're coming up with stuff that's going to get as little criticism as possible. Whereas I think bands 20, 30 years ago didn't care so much about that.
No, I feel that the bands 20, 30 years ago were trying to get as much criticism as possible. Yeah. I go back and like read some of the, I'm sure you have, but for folks listening, go back and read some of the interviews that like the 90s black metal guys did. Like they were like overtly saying things that would get them canceled today and everything like that. Really, really outlandish, extreme stuff, just for the fun of it, just to do it. And then you look at like the 80s thrash bands that were here in the States, like Slayer putting the Iron Eagle on their logo. So Manowar doing it too, right? These guys were they just wanted to rattle cages, right? They were just doing it to rattle cages, because that's what metal was about, was kind of like this uncaged masculine aggression, this like roar into the ether, and kind of to piss off the church ladies and the nannies of the longhouse that tried to keep that energy down for decades and everything. With the parental advisory, and culture dads, we talk about this a lot. And this ain't nothing changed. It's just they just kind of like change their costume now, the managerial state. And I think that because the managerial state has the weapons of the technosphere now, has all of the tools that the mecha-nerd gives to their arsenal, they're much more efficient at being these kind of like helicopter nannies to make sure that young men don't get too uppity with their art and what they have to say.
Yeah. I mean, undoubtedly. I guess bands back in those days kind of had the law on their side more so now than they do now. And I don't know. Well, I don't know what it is, because I don't even think that in most places, particularly America, there aren't really any laws which are preventing bands from being as kind of outrageous and outspoken. I guess it's kind of this self-censorship that comes through social media. But yeah, I mean, definitely those black metal bands in the 90s, they were pretty incendiary. And then, you even got the likes of Peter Steele from Typo Negative, huge band in the 90s. And like he didn't give a shit. He'd say anything that he wanted to say. And most of the time he meant it as well.
Yeah, exactly. I remember. I'm sure you recall this when Phil Anselmo from Pantera was doing a show and he did the Roman salute or whatever during the show when he was all drunk, right? And then like all of these persnickety little, I don't want to say because I know you keep it clean. These like what's the British nonces. Punces. What's the word? What's the word for queers? Right?
Ponces. Yeah.
Yeah, these guys come out like the guy from Machine Head coming out to scold him. We don't want this in your metal community, you little bitch. Jesus Christ. I'm trying not to say those words, okay?
But say, man, I don't care.
Yeah. All right. He's a fucking faggot. This guy is such a huge like what an insufferable little. Oh my God. And it's just that made me so sick. And not because if I was Phil Anselmo, I probably wouldn't be going and doing Roman salutes, getting drunk in front of a bunch of people. I probably wouldn't have done that. But I'm from the old school of metal, right? Where that was like, you could just do that and just like rattle cages and ruffle feathers. And like heavy metal as an art form was like, we liked it, right? And the fact that there was these his fellow musicians, these guys come out to scold him, a grown ass man to scold him was about the gayest shit I've ever seen. And from that point, I knew that metal was going to be going down the hill to like this what we see today. With and I know you talk about this all the time. The vaccines, you can't come to my show if you're not vaccinated. Like oh my God, how gay.
Yeah. It is, and it's a real shame as well. Like, that Machine Head guy. I just think with people like him, it's like, why do you need to say anything? Even if you personally disapprove of what Phil Anselmo did, which, to be honest, I don't even think he gives a shit. I think it was just an opportunity for him to virtue signal and kind of like, stake his claim in the scene as being like above Phil Anselmo or something, But I mean, I've met Phil Anselmo, and he was a really cool guy, very, very down to earth, really cool. We exchanged a couple of emails afterwards because once he heard that I'd done artwork for Burzum, it was kind of funny actually, because I was really drunk and I ended up in his backstage room at a festival. Which I wouldn't have done if I hadn't been drunk at the time, but it was funny because I'm like a huge fan of certain Pantera songs, but I'm not a huge Pantera fan. So I wasn't like hugely fazed by meeting Phil Anselmo, but when he heard that I'd done artwork for Burzum, he was really, really excited to meet me, which I found really odd. And we exchanged a couple of emails afterwards because he wanted me to do some design work for his label. He runs a small label called House Core Records, I think it is. I mean, it never went anywhere, but he was a really cool guy, very down to earth, considering. And man, I mean, what a great voice. Cemetery Gates off Cowboys from Hell is the first metal song that I ever heard. And to this day, I still think it's one of the best.
That's one of the greatest metal vocal performances there is. That album, Cowboys from Hell, I know, this is because I'm a huge Pantera fan. I even like their later stuff that everybody hates, right? Was it Reinventing the Steel? I even like that album, I'm not going to lie. But that album, Cowboys from Hell, is like one of the greatest. It's a masterpiece front to back. The B-side songs, Medicine Man, The Sleep, like the entire album front to back is just a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's my favorite Pantera album too.
Yeah. So Phil Anselmo was cool.
Yeah, he was really cool. And I just don't see what harm he ever did. I mean, I think he made it clear enough, both before that incident and after that incident, that he doesn't hold any hatred for people of other races and backgrounds, and I think that's all that he ever needed to do. I remember, one of my favorite black metal bands, Satyricon, toured with Pantera back in, I think it was the very early 2000s or maybe the late 90s.
They toured together?
Wow. They toured America together. And so I have like the tour like DVD of that tour, and you know, it's got loads of stuff of Pantera in there. And you know, Pantera are backstage hanging out in their dressing room, and they've always got the Confederate flag there, but it always says heritage, not hate. You know, and I think that's a principle that, you know, you and I and probably most people stand by. You know, Pantera and Phil Anselmo have always made it very clear that their worldview is not based on hatred. He's just not an apologetic like simp. You know, he's just like an old school American with an old school attitude, and that's it. But he doesn't mean anyone any harm.
Yeah. And, you know, all that they've done, like Pantera, all of those guys from that band are known for like going out on a limb and helping upcoming bands and like doing stuff for the people. They're like, you know, they're regular old blue collar Texas boys. You know what I mean? How can you, I don't know, just so what? The guy got drunk and did some edgy stuff on stage. A big deal. You know what I mean? I agree with you. Getting out to virtue signal about it. It's just, I don't know. It makes me sick.
Do you know what? I think that speaks to and I think it speaks to a wider issue, because I don't know if you have this experience as well, but what I've come to realize throughout my life is that the people who want to be seen as the most socially acceptable are actually the worst people. Like when it comes down to it, they are the most selfish, the most disloyal, the most shallow, the most insincere people, the ones who want to be seen as being on the right side of history. Whereas the guys like Pantera, who don't really give a fuck how, you know, what people think of them, are actually the best, most genuine, most generous, most thoughtful, most open-minded, you know. And this is something that I've realized every year that goes by in my life. I realize the truth of that more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a correlation between virtue signaling and like narcissism. You know, this idea of people that want to be seen for being morally superior, but actually aren't. It's Machiavellianism. It's I remember in like 2009-ish, 2010, like right where people were starting to pick up the gay thing. And I remember when I was on Facebook. This was before I really started going hard with podcasting. I remember on Facebook, I saw a bunch of people from my hometown like adopt the rainbow flag as their profile picture. I remember I made a post. It was like, well, kind of funny that everybody that puts up the rainbow flag on their profile picture is actually a shitty person in real life. And I'll tell you what, it didn't. A bunch of the people that had the rainbow like messaged me, like threatening me, calling me names, like really like mean-spirited shit. I was like, dude, you are, one guy in particular, I was like, dude, you have 3 kids to different women that you don't pay for. You're in jail every other fucking year, and you're a thief and a scumbag, and everybody hates you. But you know, you're coming at me like you have the grounds for moral superiority. That's how these people are. You're absolutely right. There is a correlation between virtue signaling and just being a rotten, disgusting, terrible person.
Yeah, I mean, my wife, you know, she was kind of a little bit behind me in her kind of political journey, so to speak, and all of her best friends up until, you know, just a couple of years ago really were very kind of progressive neoliberal virtue signaling, you know, those kinds of people. And they were very scathing about, I mean, they even started to like chastise my wife because of me and because of my unwillingness to kind of toe the line. But these are people, these girls, like half of them had cheated on like on at least one of their, you know, their boyfriends, you know what I mean? Whereas like in the kind of more traditionalist, you know, nationalist conservative mindset, I hardly know anyone who has ever like been unfaithful to their partner. You know, it even goes down to that level. It's totally true. And that's why I don't give a shit anymore about what those kinds of people think of me. Like, I genuinely don't care at all, because their opinion means nothing to me anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I tell my friends all the time that are like, it's like, dude, you are worried about the judgments from people that literally advocate for like pedophiles and are just like the most rotten, disgusting people. You know, I see this. This is why I don't really, and I try not to get on the like screw normies or like any of that kind of stuff, because I think I don't know, it's a little weird, but I don't really venture too far outside like the folkish and nationalist spheres anymore. I chill with my heathen bros because it's like, do we have our problems in the heathen community? Yeah, we do. And sometimes there's people that do nasty stuff? Yeah, there is. But those people are like cast out. Those people are viewed, are criticized. Those people aren't allowed to come around anymore. They're judged. Right?
They're shamed,
They're shamed, right? That's shameful. And the people that I know that are kind of like in normie sphere, they're all banging each other's wives. They're like going to jail. It's just like, and who are you guys to judge us? You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's liberating. It's a liberating realization, I think, and we should like push that. We should take solace in that because, you know, our people, we're good. You know, we're good people.
We're the good guys. We're good guys. How I don't have a timer. How long have we been going here for?
We have been recording for bear with me. An hour and 12 minutes.
Very good. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? No, I've enjoyed this a lot. It was a really cool free-form conversation, and it's always good to talk to you, Dave. Yes, sir. You as well. What do you got coming out with your music and everything? I know you're a writer too. Do you have anything you're writing, or what's coming out of the Fyrgen?
Well, I'm not. I wouldn't really consider myself a writer. I mean, to the extent that lyrics are actually the thing that come hardest to me as a musician. That's always the thing I write last. But musically, I'm not really doing much with Wolcensmen at the moment. Although I have to say, like, someone shared in the Fyrgen chat group today. They shared a video of a Latvian like midsummer pagan folk song, and I found that so inspiring that, you know, I'm starting to think that maybe I need to start writing some kind of devotional pagan music for Wolcensmen, like with a sense of urgency, because I just think there's this immense power to that, which you know, you asked me earlier what I think is lacking in the artistic realm, you know, for people like us. And I think that is a good example of what we could be doing more of, you know, these very kind of like emotionally rousing devotional hymns. We should be at the very least coming together to sing them, if not creating new ones, you know? So I've got some kind of like vague ideas about that, but I've actually kind of turned my attention to metal. I've joined a couple of bands, which I won't mention because they've not been announced yet. But I've joined both bands that I'm actually a big fan of. Well, actually 3 bands that I'm a big fan of have asked me to join, and partly that's because of my my attitude over the last couple of years with regards to all of the restrictions and the state of the music scene and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm going to be working on that stuff over the next few months and that, and I think maybe later this year or next year I'll have some stuff to show for that. So yeah, I'm busy behind the scenes. I'm also making a big move to like a really rural location in a couple of months' time. I'm going to be busy kind of setting up for homesteading and stuff like that. So I've got all kinds of stuff going on, and it's always a struggle to find time for the creative stuff. But yeah, I need to do it. You know, I need to make time for that stuff, just like you do and everyone else does.
What's up with the homesteading stuff? You're firing up a little farm, going Ted build?
Yeah, we are buying a house in rural Wales, actually. So we're technically leaving England. Yeah, just because property prices in Wales are actually affordable, whereas they aren't in England for various reasons that I won't go into. But yeah, we're going to have like 2 or 3 acres of land. We're going to be setting forth straight away, growing as much food as possible. We're going to get chickens and goats and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we're actually like moving in with my mum as well. So we're going to have this kind of multi-generational setup there.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, when it all kind of pulls through. But yeah, the idea will be to really kind of try and secure my children for, what I believe is coming over the next few years with regards to this agenda for the 21st century.
And I gotta ask you real quick. You're gonna have livestock. Are you gonna be eating them?
I'll definitely be eating the eggs of the chickens. And if we do get goats, then I'll milk them and I'll drink the milk. Yeah, but I won't actually eat the meat. No, I this is something that you and I kind of will always like playfully butt heads on. But I doubt I'll ever eat meat for the rest of my life, unless I'm in a survival situation which requires it.
Do you ever like miss it?
I don't remember it. The last time I ate meat, I was 15 years old, so I haven't eaten meat for 23 years.
Yeah. So you don't like walk past a barbecue joint and you're like, oh man.
No, not at all. No, I don't. I genuinely don't miss it. And I just for the benefit of anyone listening, I'm not like a preachy vegetarian or vegan or anything like that. I have no like judgment either way for anyone who does or doesn't eat it. It's just a purely personal choice. And I promised myself many years ago that if I ever ate meat again, then it would be something that I killed. At least the first thing that I ate would be something that I killed myself, because. And that's just a personal promise I made myself. It's like a personal kind of value. But yeah, it's just a personal choice. I'm quite content and healthy and physically fit in my state of vegetarianism.
So if you ever got into that situation and you're gonna eat meat for the first time, what are you gonna make? Are you gonna do some bangers and mash? Are you just gonna grill up a steak? How are you gonna do it?
Well, it would have to be something that I've killed. So for that reason, I would probably go with either a fish or a chicken or something like that. That would be easier than like slaughtering a cow. So yeah, likelihood is it would probably be chicken, and I would probably just carve it up and eat like a chicken breast or something like that. I don't know. I haven't given it any thought really.
So I do got to ask you real quick, because you mentioned something about what's coming in the next century. What do you think's coming?
Well, I mean, I'm referring there to the agenda for the 21st century, which was a UN document, which I think it was 1992 or 93 was put forth to and signed onto by 119, I think it was, nations. And it's basically this idea of sustainable goals, which we're seeing come into the fore now. This idea that certain industries and ways of eating, even, like the whole vegan agenda, like eating meat is no longer sustainable. Like burning wood for heat in your home is no longer sustainable. Driving cars are no longer sustainable. Not being vaccinated is no longer sustainable. So that's where we're heading. That's where our enemy wants to take us, to this situation where we have to get regular vaccine updates in order to be able to function in society, where we're forced to use these central bank digital currencies, where we are pretty much forbidden through prohibitive measures of cost and stuff from driving cars, from eating the way that we're accustomed to eating, or most people are accustomed to eating. So I think if we want to hold on to any of those old values and those old ways of being, then we're going to have to find a way to supply those things for ourselves, because we're not going to be able to get them from the supermarkets and from, the state anymore.
So what do you think that world's going to look like?
I think it's going to be probably 90% of people will adhere to it out of comfort and, convenience. Just like 90% of people got their COVID jabs, out of convenience, because they thought that if they didn't do that, then they wouldn't be able to, board a plane and go on holiday and stuff like that, even if they knew that they were doing something that they shouldn't really have to do. Most people will always defer to convenience. But I think that there's definitely going to be a small but proud and resolute section of mankind, particularly within, the European and colonial lands, particularly in America, who will make an effort to form these kind of detached parallel societies. We may never be able to form entirely self-sufficient detached societies, but I think we'll be able to detach enough that we can retain some of our customs and dignities.
How soon do you think this is coming?
Well, I mean, their agenda keeps referencing 2030, so I think that they want most of these things in place by 2030. But I think a lot of it is going to come sooner than that. I mean, I'm kind of looking towards this winter to see what's going to happen. I just have a really bad feeling about this winter. I think the financial impact of the last 2 years is really going to start to land. I mean, it already is for most of us. We've all noticed the price of things go up, but I think it's going to kind of fall off a cliff this autumn and this winter, and it's all by design, of course. So I think, I mean, my wife and I we drive far less than we did 2 years ago because of the cost of fuel. And again, that's all by design. And I think that it's not going to be long before people really are avoiding driving, and who are, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of these things are going to come sooner than we think. I think the central bank digital currencies could come out pretty soon. I think I wouldn't rule out the kind of introduction of central bank digital currencies in some countries within the next year or two, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think we need to be working towards. We need to be thinking about these things and thinking, what if this stuff does happen? Maybe this Dan guy from the Fyrgen, maybe he's like a crazy paranoid conspiracy theorist or whatever. Maybe I am. I hope I am. I really do. But what if? Are you prepared for that situation if it does come to that in the next few years? I think we need to be working towards it. So that's what we've been doing, and that's a big part of why we bought this rural property that we're going to be moving into in a couple of months' time.
Yeah, I have. I've seen there's a little bit of a. I don't know what the word is for a point of contention between certain parties that do believe in the Agenda 21. Calling it a conspiracy is like. First of all, what does conspiracy mean? You can get charged with conspiracy. Conspiracy means to conspire. It means that you're planning to do something. There's more evidence to support it than the Agenda 21 document is a real document. It was really signed by real people, by real elites. It's not like some made up thing, right? It's not the Earth is flat. You know what I mean?
No.
It's a real document. So
it's extremely official. Like, it couldn't be more official. It was signed by I think it's 119 of the world's nations. The leaders of the world's nations signed this UN document. It is very official. They mean it. They're not messing about.
Yeah. And I don't know how much of my stuff that you've paid attention to, talking about the vaccine and everything. I sincerely believe that the vaccine is kind of a slippery slope that they've put in place in order to normalize gene editing technology. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I follow your stuff, Dave, and I agree. I think that's certainly one of the more plausible aspects of it, for sure.
Yeah. So.
I mean, sorry, just to add on that, I mean, how long have technocrats and scientists been genetically modifying plants? How long have they been modifying animals? We know that they've been modifying animals for experimenting on animals for a while. They view us as cattle, so why wouldn't they move on to attempting to modify humans?
Yeah, these are people. A lot of folks don't realize that these elites. They aren't like us. They don't have the same worldview as us. They don't look at reality the same way that we do, right? They don't look at other people the same way that we do. A lot of folks don't realize that they look at us as pawns. Like the song War Pigs, right? They're talking about using people like pawns in chess. That's exactly how they view us. They don't even look at us as people. They look at us as like these kind of like blocks of organic matter to be used as like Legos and to do whatever they want with us, right? So it's like, why wouldn't they do something? It seems like this is just a logical conclusion that they would want to treat us like this and have this sort of agenda and kind of position themselves to be this ruler of a new world. And it goes back to like occultism and stuff as well, right? They want to create this new golden age, right? They want to create this new golden age where they are kings and we are their cattle, right? So it's like, how is it that this is far-fetced? How is it that this is some conspiracy theory? I don't know.
It's not. I mean, my good friend Phil from Mimers Brunner, he always says, anything that your enemy can do to weaken you, they will do. You know, it's as simple as that. So unless you believe that the technocrats and your government do have your best interests at heart, then you need to consider any possibility that they might use these methods to weaken us. Anything that is at their disposal, any technology that is at their disposal, they will use against us. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's like the people they go watch these documentaries about CIA mind control in the 50s, and then but if you bring something up now about what the CIA is doing now, they think that you're conspiracy. You think they just stopped? Right? You think they just gave up on those things? Like, hey, guys, we have found a moral compass. We now have a conscience. So we are going to stop all this evil shit that we're doing. You think that they did that? You think that the corporations that like sold us heroin and opiates and massacred 80,000 people nationwide in the United States, that they just like 10 years ago, they're like, oh yeah, guys, that thing that we did where we like murdered all those people and made trillions of dollars, we're not going to do that stuff anymore. You think that stopped? Like what? It's just crazy to me, the logic or the lack of logic that people have. It's crazy.
Yeah, they neglect to kind of mention people like Edward Bernays, who like mastered the art of propaganda and like mind control through advertising and stuff. And you even get these people who are kind of broadly in our sphere who they know every detail about the truth of World War II as they see it. And it's like, but do you not realize that whatever you think about that part of history, the same people are still in charge? They've not left. They've not exited the arena. They are still there, and they're more powerful now than they were then. So whatever you think happened then, times that deception and that maliciousness by 100 now.
It's just crazy to me.
Yeah,
I don't know. All right, Mr. Dan. Well, we've been going for a while here. We're going to wrap it up. Would you like to say anything in conclusion?
No, just I really like this podcast. I think and the kind of the vibe that you give it is this kind of positive, approach to our culture and celebrating the kind of fun aspect of what it is to be a human in the modern age, and I think that's really important. Like we touched on some pretty negative stuff for like the last sort of 10 minutes now, but we have a lot to kind of to be thankful for, a lot to enjoy, lots of kind of camaraderie, lots of great culture, lots of talent, and just thank you for helping to bring it to the fore.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love having you on, Mr. Dan. You're one of my favorite guys out there. I listen to a fair amount of your podcasts, and I just love your content. I like your music, and it was an honor having you on, getting to talk to you again, and all that good stuff. But I think that it's important that we don't hate ourselves now. What does it say in the Eddas? It says that Odin pulls the hatred from men's hearts. He pulls the hatred from our hearts. He liberates us from the sickness of spite and anger and like all of these things. And when we develop this faith, we develop our faith in the spiritual traditions of our forefathers. It's a very positive and holistic and healing process. A lot of people like to focus on like the martial stuff and how our ancestors were warriors and all this kind of stuff. But our ancestors were also very, very loving right? They loved each other. They cared very deeply for one another. You know, we have archaeological evidence of them putting of building prosthesis for people, like crutches for guys that are lame, and like things to make old people more comfortable. They loved their elders. They loved every member of their clan. They viewed themselves as a unit. Family was everything to them. They understood that life was a gift, and that it was a gift from the gods, and that the gods were real and they're looking out for them. The most powerful beings in the universe were on their side, and that they are their children, like literal children. And ain't nothing changed, man. We're still those people. We are still those people. The gods still love us. Our ancestors still love us. They're in the other world, hearing us, hearing our words. They're rooting for us, and they want us to win, and we will win. And we just need to realize that although there is a lot of bad stuff going on today, there were periods of time that were worse, right? And we got through those times, and we're going to get through these times, and we can do it with a smile on our face, with goodness in our hearts, and love for one another, and create great things that will put a marker on our saga, our chapter in the grand ancestral saga, and say that this time was cool too. We did cool stuff here too, and that will inspire our descendants as well. So that's just kind of my whole thing.
It's really vitally important that we know what we're fighting for, so we need to focus on that positivity, and we need to remember that we have an immense amount to be proud of. And you said it well there, Dave.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Dane, we're going to close it out. Many hails and blessings to you. Many hails and blessings to all the culture dads out there. If you're listening now, that means that you're signed up to the exclusive Culture Dads podcast. But we got so much more stuff lined up for you guys. And if you're not, make sure to go to imperiumpress.org/podcast and go check out the awesome stuff that Imperium Press has to offer. Hardback books, other podcasts, lots of good stuff. So much good stuff. You guys are going to love it. Man, he's got the folk tales and the Indo-European tradition. He's got the hoverball. He's got definitely the best print edition of Beowulf available on the market today. So go over to Imperium Press and get yourself some of this stuff. And if you want to see what I'm doing, man, Bizarchives, we're working overtime, bringing you guys the classics, original, all the good stuff from the weird fiction traditions that we loved so much for many, many decades. So anyway, that's it. Hails and blessings to everybody. I'll see you guys next time.
You're listening to an episode of the latest Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette, where two fathers and community leaders discuss modern culture from a timeless perspective. Head on over to kulturedads.com for podcasts every week.